Вітаю тих, хто
I would like to welcome our permanent guests and first-comers. My name is Maria from Ukrinform Media Center, which from the beginning of the full-scale invasion helps the journalists to put highlight on this war. On the monthly basis, Media Center conducts meetings and training classes for journalists and fixers where we talk about legal, security and professional aspects of your work. And Media Center has the producers unit on board where you can get contacts of interesting heroes and other materials that you can use in your articles. These are QR codes and you can contact us. We also have photo bank where you can freely use photos from that photo bank of ours and use it for your materials. Today we're going to be discussing the PSYOPs, Telegram channels, propaganda, and how to cooperate with the authorities. Today is the off-the-record meeting, so I would kindly ask you not to record and note this briefing. Our today's friends are Alina Bondarchuk, head of the Information Collection and Monitoring Department of the Center for Countering Disinformation of the National Security and Defense Council, Colonel Dmytro Yerokhin, representative of the Dmytro Yerokhin, Colonel, representative of the Department of Counterintelligence Protection of the State's Interests in the Field of Information Security of the Security Service of Ukraine, and Artem Shevchuk, head of the expert group at the Strategic Communications Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Hello, colleagues. It's the first public appearance for me. I'm not a public person. I might be chaotic. I might not look like an experienced speaker, but I work for the Security Service of Ukraine. This is the National Counterintelligence Agency. So the big question is, how come the counterintelligence that has to combat spies is interested in Telegram and what the Telegram has to do with it? Well, a couple of platitudes for you, but probably not. Since the statehood began at certain territories, there were intelligence and counterintelligence. You need to get something and protect the information, respectively. Each intelligence that I combat and my service combats has two basic functions. First is to collect sensitive information from OSINT all the way to confidential papers. And the second basic function is that of coercion or influence. And it's all about making the leaders of the enemy state to pass the decisions in favor of the company that coerces us to do that, or refuse to do certain actions that are unacceptable for coercing or influencing countries. So this is the second, but not the least of the functions. Actually, it recently becomes the priority one, both for us and the Russian Federation. How it could be done? You can work with a decision maker, making them your agents or prime minister or somebody like that, but it's tough. Tough in all the logistical respects, but you can also influence decision makers via public opinion, and thus impacting public opinion and how to counter this if the foreign states tries to influence our public's opinion. That's what we do. So how this influence happens? You identify who is that person you want to influence, the president, prime minister, MPs, members of parliament, and then you figure out how you would influence it and through whom. NGOs, associations, certain strata of population, like the age group of 30 to 50 voters from certain territory or community. Then you figure out what sort of influence you need to perform on them. They need to not do something or vice versa, do what you need. They need to be against joining NATO or in favor of the Russian world, but that's simplification, of course, to a certain extent. Then you select the channel, how to impact that key target audience so that they will be the influencers, they will be influencing the government or the authorities to do or not to do something. So one of the efficient channels of doing that coercion and impact is Telegram, because recently the audience of the Telegram increased by 41% and keeps growing, and now that we have the United TV Marathon, more people get their news from Telegram. And quite obviously, the Russian intelligence community of the Russian Federation, they aim their efforts through Telegram channels to impact the public opinion in Ukraine and thus coerce the authorities. It's quite obvious that this impact or influence could be done via clearly anti-Ukrainian channels, aiming for pro-Russian strata of population. Others that are fake Ukrainian channels, but in reality are being administered anonymously from Russia, or Telegram channels like Shari's, Panchenko, for good Russians from Ukraine. So purely anonymous channels, and residents is legitimate black quarter, others which we know from our channels that they are managed from Russian territory and analyzing their messages. It's all about destabilizing the political life in Ukraine, the division of the society, the division between Ukraine and its allies, etc. Personified Telegram channels, Shari Panchenko among others, that make statements on their own behalf. That's another subcategory, so to speak. What else to add on that? Well, on the Telegram in general, how come it became the best channel for focusing information endorsed by the Russian intelligence? Durov, the founder, the Russian citizen, has close ties with the Russian business even though he stays abroad. At a certain stage of time, he allegedly was in the ranks of the opposition, but in 2018, when they talked about closing Telegram, there was an agreement reached between Durov and Roskomnadzor. He gave access to FSB, as far as we know, to certain databases of Telegram. He allows them to de-anonymize the users of interest to the FSB, and for the general public, the Decision superficially on the surface was not close the Telegram channel because it helps us to fight extremism and propaganda of war and all that. So then the big question is, how could we work with Telegram? No representative office in Ukraine, no contacts with Durov or his management team, any requests from the SBU, and there were more than 1,500 of them, plus or minus, on blocking Telegram channels that are involved in the propaganda of not only war but violence, pro-Russian narratives, that goes without saying. It's freedom of expression and they don't react. The only thing they react to is propaganda, violence, demonstration of killings or corpses, and in exceptional cases they block then. So Telegram is quite an efficient channel for the Russian intelligence to convey their messages, thus influencing the public opinion in Ukraine by disseminating their narratives, and that's why the Security Service of Ukraine pays attention on Telegram as a messenger that reached the level that allows to create mass media. Anyone, a talented person with enough investment, could create a mass media outlet right there and then. That's brief background why we are of interest, have vested interest of Telegram.
Дякую, пане полковнику.
Thank you, Colonel. You initially modestly stated that you are not a professional speaker. You looked at us, but well, jokes aside, I fully agree with everything you said, but the way I see it, in your eyes, counterintelligence is something that Russians are using as the tool, but trying to infiltrate us, our society, they allow us to better focus our messages on particular strata of our population, thanks to them. So I will slightly punish you at the beginning with certain statistics. You can see here the data from the research of Ukrainian Telegram and Ukrainian Infoprostor for a couple of years. And if you ask me, how would I describe it? In one phrase, too big to fall, because it really became overly big in Ukraine now. As we speak, according to the freshest research from Komis, 63.3% of Ukrainians started reading Telegram channels to receive news after the invasion, 24th of February 2022. So the day when this full-scale invasion was launched became the birthday for Telegram in Ukraine. Look at what Qatar Ukraine shows us for the duration of the use of the Telegram content a day, per day. Before it was 4 or 5 minutes on the average a day before the invasion. And that time Telega, the nickname for Telegram, was a messenger for the youth. That's where we shared gifs and stickers, memes, reading some narrow subject matter audience groups, and try to communicate there, not in Viber where parents stay. But then the invasion happened, and that was the springboard for Telegram coverage, because people started getting huge volume of data with a high rate of update of that data, refresh rate. I remember when the invasion started and you switch on the TV and you can't make sense of why they tell you of what you read 18 times in Telegram channels, and it's as if things are happening twice already in the loop. But since a person cannot live constantly, permanently under such volume of data, plus the channels started self-repeating themselves because you read a lot of things in a lot of channels, the duration of the use of those groups reduced, but not below the pre-invasion levels, and my prediction would be it would never go below it. Why? Ukrainians are preferring Telegram. There are 4 major bullets that attract Ukrainians to Telegram. Why the Ukrainians like to read news there? Firstly, it's convenient, user-friendly, because Telega now is between the news sites or classical media, where you have to come to and specially read news from, and social media, where you subscribe, like Facebook, where you subscribe to Ukrinform to see what the Ukrinform publishes, even though your scroll has been done randomly, but here you don't depend on any algorithms. It's fast because everybody tries to be the first to get the highest hype from publishing the hottest news. People are very much interested in Telegram, the way how fast it reacts. And this operational level readiness of sharing the news about especially the incoming shellings or airstrikes, whether to run to the shelter and hide or not. And also it gives some unique content, something that traditional mass media cannot provide you with, because you have to stick to journalist standards there. The content that cannot be provided by the government authorities, because we need to verify information and only share the information that we're 100% confident in. But our society always wants to come from the left field and get access to some additional content. Here's the research paper, mid-2022, supported by USAID, conducted by Dmytro agency. What resources the Ukrainians are using to consume news. As you can see, ranked 1, far ahead of internet, social media, and TV is way behind internet, let alone printed press. And look at the blue fragments on the right-hand slide, which talk about exclusive consumption. 31% of respondents claim that they exclusively news from social media. For me, that's quite a lot, 1/3. And then when we ask them what sort of mass media they use, that's what we see here, the breakdown between various mass media outlets, and Telegram is the only that has increased the use, the number of consumers of its news from 20 to 60%, so triple growth. And being in your shoes, I would think, listening to this, well, that was mid-22, a year passed. Did things change? But the key conclusion for the current year, nothing has changed. So this is similar research funded by USAID, but conducted by Pora, an NGO this time, if I'm not mistaken. And Telegram has not dwindled, but only increased. It stays at number 1. And this news is being supported by Gradus research agency data, which puts Telegram at rank number 169, well, compared to 71 in the left-hand side. So traditional media, Gradus and others, they are ranked 4th, even behind YouTube, which is not like a news outlet, at least it never used to be, was more about analytics. So what are Ukrainians interested when using Telegram? Well, the war. The war lives, the society lives in this war. Sometimes somebody believes that somebody forgot that the war is still on, and we hear about such talks. But when you look what the Ukrainians are looking for, combat news 95%, shellings and air raid alarm news, and with the number of those alarms a day, we recognize that most of the people found the way to adapt. For instance, the way how they perceive the level of threat has been gradually dwindling. And so they want to figure out if it's a grave alarm or just your garden variety alarm. And well, of course, I kindly ask you to go to shelters every time you hear the alarm, but I'm just sharing what the reality is. Also, people are interested about the political events in Ukraine, but in our case, it's all about ongoing war, international affairs, and entertainment publications. Only 24% of the audience claim that they are also interested in entertainment content of Telegram.
Інше дослідження, наскільки телеграм-каналів ви підписані?
Here's another research. How many Telegram channels you subscribe to? Tegestat.ru is an open IP resource from Russia that collects the statistics on all the Telegrams, all the channels. Like the Ministry of Defense, here you go. Ukrinform, here it is. The Center for Countering Disinformation. Statistics, reports, everything. All in open access. So, in 2021, Tegestat conducted huge survey of the audience of Ukraine, Belarus, and that other third neighbor country. The big one. How the audience behaves in Telegram. And one of the bullets of the research paper was the number of Telegram channels you subscribe to, but the picture has changed. In 23, for some reason they haven't conducted the research in Ukraine. I wonder why, but we conducted our own research. So in 2021, there were groups 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, well, a pace of 5 channels. It was quite linear. The higher the figure of channels, the lower the number of. Now, 1/5 TV channels, such a huge break from the second place 6 to 10, while more than 10 is so much similar to the previous answer. But when somebody says that it's more than 10, it could be 11 or 65 actually, and it's all like 17.4%, all of them. So this overconsumption and oversaturation of information that we feel after the invasion started, well, it's causes for individuals to block the inflow of data from everywhere. They just delete the channels that they stopped reading and leave only the most favorite ones. So for our presence in Telegram, we, from the government authorities, should recognize that the competition became so much stronger, and unfortunately, we are not always winning this competition to unverified sources. The Telegram, channel-wise, could be broken down into two target audience groups. First, verified channels, those that have the blue tick. The second, anonymous. And in between are the channels that don't have the blue tick, but have the reputation either of famous media or famous persons. They're authors' channels, so to speak, where a person responsible for the content they produce, but they haven't put the blue tick in that box. So what's the benefits of communication through verified channels? At such channels, the content is always verified, confirmed, and it's safe from the standpoint of current combat hostilities. So, in light of the strategic communications of the armed forces of Ukraine, if something has been published at the official channels, then it's safe to repeat this information, because for disseminating of certain information, you might be criminally liable for them, like about the location, transportation, all the military-related information. And we in the Ministry of Defense and the Armed Forces and all the other colleagues that have verified accounts, the content we disseminate in our scope of authority is quite unique, because we produce this content, we are its authors. But you need to pay for all that in pace. You cannot be fast and at the same time publish verified, safe, and verifiable content. So here, as the Ministry of Defense, we need to stay in balance between providing timely information and interesting information on the one hand, on the other hand, not to undermine the security of military operations, and verifying the content, not to publish anything that is not 100%. The second half is this anonymous segment of Telegram. It could be fast, even from our standpoint, too fast for our liking. It might be trying to hunt hype, very much needed, but no responsibility and liability. So you published the information about the shellings, and the Russians give you likes, but no responsibility, no liability. So anonymous channels are always about money or influence. Why money? The higher the hype of the content you publish, the broader your audience, the more expensive your ads time is. And such channels like Trocha and others, they use this approach, hit in all the directions, and then you might hit something, and then you look at some of the content and it's mind-boggling how it came there. But if it's the second part, influence, that's what Dmytro was talking to us about. Channels that directly or indirectly are being managed by the Russians. The anonymous channels have, the advantage is speed, and the fact that they were not taking and bearing any responsibility allowed them to publish anything. We could not do it in the public environment, but official communications also try to follow the best adequate practices of an official information, and when the security arrangements allow for this, we also try to promote some news stories. What I like is what the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine started doing. If previously the content about what's incoming and what to do has been published everywhere, and we all have the favorite ones: Monitor, PP, Radar, Nikolaevsky Voenkar, or other channels, and now this, we as consumers in Ukraine has to get this information from the official source. And then, a priori, people trust it more. And here, where Alina steps in. Well, let me add my spoonful of negative news to all this bountiful of positives. So verified sources versus anonymous sources. But the distinction is verification, and why the delay happens. What the Ministry of Defense colleague said: verification is the confirmation that the alleged fact is true. Why it's needed, this verification, was one of the examples in order to avoid the dissemination of PSYOPs. Let me explain what I mean by this. So what we have, an anonymous information. "30 or 40 fakes a day our Center of Countering Disinformation collects daily, but not all of those fakes have been disseminating within the Ukrainian info space. Why? Because we do the verification of all the news. What other mass media is doing, they take in all the garbage that Russia sends over the fence to us, and for the sake of this hype or whatever you call this, they, without verifying the information, without seeing the coverage of this news, they might have disseminated it in two groups in Telegram where there are 3,000 or 4,000 subscribers only, for instance. But then they artificially bring this poisonous information, and thus they overburden the reader, and the reader starts running away from news because too much of the bad news, they try to find something of entertainment value, and then we find out that how tough for the volunteers to collect donations. People don't want to hear about the war, they're tired of it, all that. So that's why we suggest use verification and don't take just the information like we read something, okay, we'll use it, but take only the verified information. If this information is disseminated in the Ukrainian information space, published by mass media, by bloggers, it's being talked and discussed about, then you make the request for verification to the agency it deals with, and then start figuring out what sort of a PSYOP we're talking here about. Now, how to resolve disputes. Verification is needed to avoid being irresponsible in terms of how truthful is the information you share. For instance, when we read about the fact that the administration staff of Kupiansk is fleeing Russia, left the city, so we asked for verification of the Ministry of Defense. Yeah, we waited for 3 or 4 hours because they need to get in touch with this place, the brigades located there with various units to figure out what exactly is going on, and is the administration staff in the city hall or not. But then in our mass media, they started celebrations. Some claimed, oh yeah, they left. Others, no, they have not. Others said, oh, the Russians are back into town. Others said, yeah, they are already in the central square. And then we tried to figure out why would Ukrainians react to something that they have not even verified has happened. So how come instead of putting this issue on pause, waiting for the official notification, but all this bacchanal started? So it almost looks like Ukrainians start leading an ordinary life. Then everybody says Putin wants to blow up Zaporozhye nuclear state. Then again, Kupiansk fell. The city hall has been captured, and Russians throw in this pebble in the pond and then fly on the wave along with us. And instead of putting the barrier between our mass media and the Russian mass media and alienate this information, we cannot allow this information coming in. We should not be supporting this wave of hype. No, we need to try and fence off, because this is the second year of the full-scale invasion, and the information space, as we can see, has changed. Before they talked about denazification, demilitarization, Putla created, or Lenin created Ukraine. Now the PSYOPs are different. Disinformation campaigns reflect different policy. By the way, while coming here today for this briefing, there's, according to Peskov, the new goal of SVO, a special military operation, as it turned out, was to shoot down the Ukrainian drones that were flying towards Moscow. That's the official statement of Peskov this morning. So, figuring out what statements we can allow into our media, regardless on what channel, it should be verified. And unless it has some undercurrents, then it's most likely all about division, pumping up panic, and all that. Verification is needed to clarify the data and statements. An interesting statement, because if a foreign media publishes a statement one of the fresh examples, the 81st Brigade, the 82nd Brigade has launched the offensive. It's the best equipped, best trained, best in everything, and foreign media wrote about this, and then Russians manipulating this they are, and if they use Brigade 82, that means that that's the end for Ukraine. The counteroffensive is over, and they've been gloating on this narrative for 2 weeks everywhere. Solovyovsk, Kiev, Kiselyov, all those studios. That's what you need verification for. That's what we request fixers to do. To disseminate the truthful information. If any information or manipulation happens, well, it's not confidential data, so we can arrange something. As for fake news, it's even easier, because the verification could be done both on your own, if it's not that tough, or fake news about Zelensky's ad in New York. They said that this ad was claimed to be in front of Trump Tower in New York City. And it says, I collected more money than Barbie movie. Before the premiere of that movie, it claimed that Zelensky actually collected more money than the movie will collect in box office. So we talked to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they talked to the consulate people, they went there, took pictures, and it turned out that there's no such ads there, but instead there was a spot where the Barbie movie was advertised, right on that spot. So it was Photoshop, and we once again confirmed in our mind's eye what our enemy is all about. We need to document all those fakes in order to have enough evidence about this information terrorism of our enemy. and then we'll have something to show if they ask us what Solovьевska, Beyeva, and Zvezda 9.1, 9 point whatever. But if we talk about disseminating such fake news in the Ukrainian infospace, the recommendation from our Center for Countering of Disinformation is try to wall off from it. Yeah, we fixate the fact that it appeared in the air, but instead of repeating it, talk about wins, about victories, about things that unite, not divide the nation. Why most of the fakes are aimed at the Russian audience? I skipped one important subtopic, by the way. All those enemy fakes, like yesterday we had about the murder of the Ukrainian soldier, female soldier. They claim that she was the brigade commander. What? She was one of the officers by the name of Tetiana. So not clear what exact position she had in that brigade. And yesterday they shared that fake 1 million coverage that brigade soldiers killed their own officer. But in reality, she blew up on the enemy's mine. So combat casualty. But what's happening in this case? Ukrainians are not reacting to such fakes. Whatever Russians claim, whatever Photoshop pictures they share, Ukrainians are virtually not reacting to this. Just come to any person on the street and ask them, do you know whether this or that happened? They would most likely tell you, oh no, come on, that's a fake. Why they're doing this then? To keep zombieing their own people, because when they reduce the dosage of that opium, people will start sombering, but it's difficult to rule not a tipsy nation. In Ukraine, which says, if you are tipsy, you will sober up, but if you are stupid, you would never smart up. So if a person, an inadequate person, supports Putler regardless of all the evidence and facts, well, look at this Lyudmila Kraken, the red-headed one, from Putin's detachments, who will be supporting Putler even when he's on the suspect bench in The Hague. But Russians are afraid that the Russians will go from under this zombifying spell, and they are spending billions of dollars for that. So I don't want the fakes that are aimed at them to be shared with the Ukrainians. Why? Well, we will document them, but we should not send this garbage in. Let's not turn ourselves into our enemies, because remember 2014, when the war started, well, actually, all the Russian information agenda in the years 2013 and 14 were all about Ukraine. When we had the Revolution of Dignity, they had live streams from the Independence Square. They knew better than us what happens at Maidan, how the rebels were moving, how the shooting started. So they started living the Ukrainian domestic politics. They're stand-up artists. They public opinion leaders, which they still had at that time, were also surprised. How come we are not discussing that most of the villages in Russia doesn't have supply of natural gas, even though we sell natural gas left and right worldwide? And they turned into this machine of hatred to Ukraine. I want us to be different from them in this regard. And if we talk about Russian news, I would like us to talk about Bavovna, our victory over them. And if we talk about documenting such information crimes, well, for that we have relevant structures authorized to collect evidence on such crimes. And that's enough. Let's not create a fact-checking agency out of all of us. This has to be fact-checking experts doing that. But the biggest problem right now is oversaturation. And sometimes Ukrainians are fed up with reading news, and they sometimes just limit the incoming news about air raid alarms and military frontline news. Somebody said that so if our airspace is safe, if this war is over, we won, will we have the needs in this Telegram channel? Or like when there was deficit of car gas, there were Telegram channel news coverage of when there will be supply in the nearest gas station. And as soon as the market was oversaturated with gas, well, those Telegram channels were closed down. So most likely that might occur to Telegram itself, and then people will just stop using it that much. But we have what we have. And is it dangerous? Yes. Does it need to be restricted somehow? Well, while Durov runs it, we cannot use it in the government institutions, even in partnership with our international institutions. We cannot make a statement that Zirada, for instance, is an enemy channel that disseminates this information. Somehow we cannot get through to them, to the administration. But there is one great benefit to all that. As Detective Media showed at one of their graphs, they increased the level of media literacy of people. Back in 2020, this level was about 55%. The media literacy average level, 55%. But in 22, 81% turned into those adept users. So confirming once again that people stopped treating information so aggressively. Even the information about blowing up the nuclear plant. Well, let's be sincere that if previously people were standing in lines trying to buy iodium medicines, but this year people just nod their heads and say, oh, who said that? Putler? Oh, forget it. Nothing would happen. So people just nod their heads and say, ah, old news, we've seen it all, nothing bad, nothing worse will happen. we still have bits of time left, and we being so relaxed so far, but let me go fast through some of the interesting cases. Actually, we evaluate everything that Russians are doing in Telegram. Absolutely everything is aimed at one of those goals. What they're doing here, it's all aimed either at demoralization of us as the civil society at large and the Ukrainian military troops in particular. The second vector of their efforts is to undermine the mobilization effort in Ukraine. And that's what they are trying to do very much, very hard. But also, at the same time, they try to support the morale of their own people, their own enemy troops, and they support hidden, and soon they will be revealed, mobilization efforts inside Russia itself. So they use such allegedly pro-Ukrainian analysts like Kuli, and they work with lots of Telegram channel and YouTube channel owners. Domestically, they use official media that belong to the government of Russia, which is all media in Russia, and use so-called voyenkory, military correspondents. The first case is about Sinkivka, which Russians are capturing every day for the last 2 weeks. They even publish photos and videos that confirm allegedly that, even though in reality, how can they possibly seize the same city over and over again? Hanna Mahler and all of the Ukrainian bloggers and centers looking at the evidence of photos and videos that Russians show here actually confirm that these are fake pictures because they're taken elsewhere and in different time. Or another example from Robotina that we fight so hard for, and finally the armed forces of Ukraine captured Robotina, and then the official information has been published. Then Brigade 47 published the footage about evacuating local civilians. At the same time, Russian voyenkors and media claim that, of course, all of the attacks on Robotina were repelled. Our boys are standing tall and all that, while our commander-in-chief publishes the footage of one of the brigades raising the flag, national flag of Ukraine on the national holiday, and Ukrainian Flag Day. So you always want to go through the fog of war and figure out what's actually going on there. Have we won already or not? And the Russians manipulate with this desire of people to find some informal, unofficial information that looks to be faster, but it proved to be just fake. Another case, this helicopter case, the recent one, about Mi-8 that the Russian Federation donated to our armed troops. Even after all of the Ukrainian official speakers published the confirmation and sharing some details of this special operation, the Russian propaganda still claims, no, you are lying, it's not what happens. In this jar full of spiders, they start biting each other, some of them claiming that no, it's the Ukrainians who are telling the truth. So when we at the official level stated that, yep, that's helicopter is all ours now, but they still need to give a spin to it so that it would be not as painful as Ukrainians are gloating about it. Another case that Dmytro will confirm. At the time of anti-terrorist operation, which was transformed into the operation of joint forces, one of the messages that Russians were undermining our mobilization effort was, let the children of the members of parliament go and fight. And certain segments of the population were poisoned with that. Now they're trying to do the same thing right as we speak. There's a wave of such stories about the children of politicians and civil servants and executives, and some of the simple-minded people swallow it hook, line, and sinker. We just launched an information campaign with high creative content, photos and videos. Let me share one of them. No, being afraid is normal, but accepting your fear, what makes you brave. We need brave people. This is a number of both videos and pictures that our partners help to disseminate it, and this information campaign would enjoy unprecedented coverage. So at the very onset of the presentation, lots of media present here wrote about this campaign. And one of the first who quoted us, Ganna Mahler Media Center, was Mr. Anatoly Kuli. And one of the channels, resident or legitimate, it doesn't matter which, they started investing those bullets here, like the children of Danilov, the children of deputies, MPs, let them fight, ordinary Ukrainians, you don't fight. Luckily, they are not as successful now as they used to be. But still, they have 1.5 million views of the video still. Another thing I would like to raise with you now is why you cannot share the information from the front lines before it's being officially shared through official channels, because you have chance of receiving content from the front lines, and there might be the temptation to be the first to say that the armed forces troops entered the beautiful, overly beautiful village. That's the make-believe name of the village. But the Russians are monitoring the messages in our information space. Of course, it's not based on the Ukrainian media and Telegram channels, but they use information space to get the confirmation of this or that information. And simply put, there's a settlement that our troops entered. The Russian troops have no communication to the artillery. The close quarter combat might be happening for days at end. Then, when somebody at the Ukrainian side claims that Ukrainians liberated the village, the Russians might start the barrage of artillery fire straight, and we have so many cases when media starts talking about something like that, and the Russians start hitting that village with everything they have, with all the casualties that it brings in. So information space is part and parcel of our counter-offensive. Sometimes some of the official statements that the Ukrainian military are making hope that mass media would disseminate it in the same wording that it's done for some reason. Only the military leaders have all of the information. Only them see the whole picture, not just the fragments. And only the military commanders understand which information and at what volume could be translated, not to harm the armed forces of Ukraine and their military ongoing operations. And it's worth reminding about the law on the protection of state secrets and all the liabilities. Interpreter's note, I will be back in 1 minute.
Ми досягли якоїсь точки, і в публічному просторі якесь експертне середовище чи медійне середовище починає аналізувати, чому та чи інша операція Збройних сил була успішна. Як вона проходила, як вона планувалась, які підрозділи були задіяні, хто куди висунувся. Це все воно може допомогти ворогу теж аналізувати. Прям це може бути вірогідність дуже-дуже низька, але якщо там ви дійшли до якихось висновків, їх опублікували, цим самим ми ворогу можемо допомогти дійти тих самих висновків швидше, наприклад. От хто грав в які-небудь «Що, де, коли», знає, як це буває, коли хтось за столом вголос сказав якусь ідею, за сусіднім столом почули і швидко її докрутили, додумали. Цей фактор теж не варто скидувати. Значить, чому це дійсно важливо? Практика показує, що як тільки
As soon as we officially informed that in a certain settlement Ukrainians were successful, that's where the Russians started cranking up their efforts exactly against that particular settlement, or like Rabotina being liberated for them. It's important now to claim that no, it's not true. We are back in Rabotina. So don't inform any news before the official speakers did. Also, sometimes the troops get the defensive position someplace, but in 30 minutes time things have changed and they have to move to other position. That's why all the information has to have certain time lag. Government authorities, media, journalists, society. The Ministry of Defense have military media center where they also have various events and briefings that cover the defense and security sector. And they have Telegram channel that has been launched to make the communication with the journalists easier. It publishes information about the announcements of the events, the information about the events that happened, press releases that the journalists can use, and photos. So those of you who have not yet subscribed, please do. You'll have much more information about what's going on the front lines. Yeah, the issue of verification and the truthfulness of what's being shared over the Telegram channel. A couple of examples. Well, when the media writes news, you're not quoting Antikor or Skeletinfo, Prokurorskaya Pravda, because you recognize that for $200, $300, $500 you can publish anything there, and by and large it's well known that those Telegram channels that have million plus subscribers, 25 to 50,000 grivnas is each ad, but if it's a fake news ad, then you pay 500 there and 50 here. So there's high probability that either it's not the truth, manipulation, coercion, or junsa. Also, we need to stay cautious with Telegram channel, like the case of Kupinsk. 6 months ago, they created a pro-Ukrainian channel that covers the events in there, in that town. Those users are in the flow of the data of what's happening in this town, how the utilities services are operating, what the mayor said, but it's managed from the Russian side. What it costs are 2 or 3 people who do the constant monitoring, and 2 or 3 people who are sharing small pieces of news 24/7. And you can pay additionally to those people so that they can raise some issues. And then when the Russians are getting ready to attack, they start disseminating the rumors. The Russians are entering the town, Ukrainian troops have fled, and so those small Telegram channels have been created by the Russians regularly, and if it's not verified, we should not pay attention to it. The same is true with Resident, Legitimny, Черный Квадрат, and other large Telegram channels. What they say, according to our data, Mi-6 informed the president that, well, as a person from the security service, I can tell you that MI6 does not call the president of Ukraine. This is all manipulation. People want to feel involved. So this is manipulation with people's subconsciousness. Okay, so I learned something that is clandestine and confidential, and it's curious and interesting, and there are other anti-Russian correspondents who claim to get news from under the table of Putler. Well, it's better not to use this, recognizing what it would lead to, namely manipulation, and thus, by even acknowledging this, we become better protected. What's happening in the Russian Telegram channels? They create parallel reality, their own parallel reality. So don't share it. There's nothing trustworthy there. Nizihir and all the others, they are under control of the Kremlin. Or it's shared in a certain dosage, but enough to manipulate. Well, let me illustrate it. Moldavsky Krot, just search for that Telegram channel. We know for sure that it's managed by the same people who are doing Resident, Legitimny, and others. So even by scrolling it, well, sometimes when you live in Ukraine and you read something about Ukraine, they might think, well, yeah, probably they heard something in the president's office, so probably that's what Yermak said, or that's... And then you'll see the same narratives against President Sandu in Moldova, that she is all about deindustrialization, disappearance of the Russian language in Moldova, so the message box is exactly the same. And so you look as an outsider on that, and then you see how it works against you. Something like that. Colleagues, we have overflowed you somehow. We are done with the keynote speeches, and now we are ready for discussion.
I have many questions. So у мене багато питань. So, partially because I don't know who here has experience with disinformation, but there's a lot of different questions, but I'll just put a couple of on the table. Would you highlight vulnerable population in Ukraine? This would be family members of officials, family members of soldiers, you know, areas we know that the Russians have been aiming for. And number two, would you mind explaining to the various colleagues in the room why we are a target audience, especially in moments like you mentioned, the Zaporizhia plant, or you know, when the dam fails and has exploded, when the Kerch Bridge is hit. Why is it important that we remember that we are a target audience? So that's the first good question there.
From our side, the main target audience is first of all army, and secondly, of course, our society who can go or who will go to army, yeah, like mobilization part of society, and the third one is our families of our army. And I think my colleagues will answer on your second question.
Yeah, so the second question is about how you see the audience. The second question is primarily, especially how journalists, foreign journalists especially, are targeted for disinformation, because we lack some of the understanding of the Ukrainian situation and the history. So when the people who are doing this work are looking to finish information, they need to remember that they're a target audience.
Я скажу на
Well, when the Ukrainians become the targets of the Russian disinformation campaigns, I know about that, when the Russians use some sensitive, painful topics, like before the full-scale invasion, these were biolabs. Ukrainians have launched coronavirus using biolab geese, but now those fakes and disinformation campaigns are only focused on the most vulnerable topics that are called PSYOPs, psychological warfare operation, the fake news campaign that hits the emotions of people, and everything to do with the military people, the troops. We all have people from among our relatives or friends who have been fighting in the at the front lines. So we are all triggered emotionally about any news about the military personnel, our troops. Now, as for the foreign press, well, and I'm not sharing any recommendation, but sharing the general golden rule for all of us. Well, we all need to start using our own critical thinking. When the Russian media makes the quote from the anonymous source, like in the office of the President of Ukraine, who claims that Zelensky is ready to start peace talks under the condition that Russia leaves Donetsk and Lugansk regions to Ukraine, while Crimea will be fought for democratically. So in this news, they claim that there is an anonymous source, not saying exactly who said this, when, is there any confirmation of what's being said. And whenever you ask our president whether there will be any concessions, well, we recently heard what president said, that, yeah, we can give back the Belgorod Oblast back to Russia if they want any land concessions from us. So as soon as they make a reference to the anonymous source, well, forget it. Next, if we haven't seen across this information in any single official document or any single official statement of the authorities. So again, it places such information under huge question mark, and it's not worth being referred to or use it as the background notes for upcoming publications. Well, it's worth understanding that you cannot trust the Russian counterparts, if you can call them that, because all top officials of the Russian Federation are involved in those special information operations, PSYOPs. So remember Peskov a couple of days before the invasion started that it would never happen. The same was said by Lavrov, even though they know what's going to happen. And Naryshkin, who is the head of the external intelligence service, one of the top officials, he is involved in this PSYOP by claiming that Poland will take half of Ukraine back into Poland, again making all those stupid statements from his high position. And it's important to understand that all of them are part and parcel of the PSYOP machine. Something like
that. Some, I don't know, briefings or other activities about context and about history, Russian and Ukrainian neighborhood, about context of war. Yeah, it will be nice for you.
Well, I'm familiar with this, but I know that my colleagues... yeah, I'm familiar with it. It's my specialty, but I see how very good colleagues lend agreement at all the wrong times. At the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we had 2 months where CNN kept saying separatist-controlled regions. And then after, literally, Gachenko is practically yelling at the CNN guy in front of me, can you please say Russian-controlled territory? 2 months later, finally we hear them say, something more accurate. But it takes time, and they mean well. But there is a lack of familiarity with the Ukrainian nuance.
And as I know, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs regularly creates some products for international journalists. For example, like in your example, a small short vocabulary, how to communicate about Russian-Ukrainian war with these phrases here: Russian-controlled separatists, Russians, and so on, so on, so on.
And also the fact that it would help if the journalists have the facts of why that is true. So it's one thing to demand to say something different, but good journalists will go, well, why? You have to show me why. So this is one of the things that would be very useful. Additional thing for folks to be aware of is, do you track what I call preceding narratives? So the example would be when the Azovstal fighters were killed in a controlled fire, but immediately Russian narratives were HIMARS, 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 and they do this over and over again, where before anyone could know anything, it's a HIMARS attack, it's shadow something. So can you maybe explain any ways that you use to watch that preceding, that way that they seed that narrative before anyone could possibly know, because it's a very common pattern we saw this year.
Well, we have one case, the real life but quite painful case, March 2022, when there was the air raid against Mariupol and the shelling of the maternity wards. We all remember the pictures of the pregnant lady who was taken out in the hospital robes, and when we all talked to those ladies, they all said, burn in hell, how can you possibly bomb the civilian hospital, that's the maternity ward to boot. But then they found that young mother her name was Marianne, family name Pidubna, something like that. Marianne was her name. They took her and brought her to the hospital of so-called DNR, Donetsk People's Republic. And that's where they took the first official comment from her when she said that, yeah, we were in the maternity ward, but she said, we couldn't figure out whether it was Russian jets or the Ukrainian artillery shelling, that it's not that simple. That's the phenomenon of this war. People who stay there, they are not allowed to come to Ukraine. They don't allow access to them. Nobody from the Ukrainian journalists or your international journalists. We have the whole territories of our country that is being occupied, where under torture and coercion, these people make official statements on camera, and these people constantly being told that Ukraine forgot about you, but if it were true, we would not keep fighting, which we will, and keep fighting, of course. So we've been documenting everything, who was firing, what was the caliber of each shells. So, but then 3 days into the hospital of DNR, all of a sudden, well, we only heard explosions. We don't know who was firing, which side it was flying into. Well, it's quite easy to explain because a young mother always is afraid for the life of her child, and none of us knows what this Mariana was told, what would happen to her or to her child if she makes this particular statement. So again, we document it all, we can see it all, but we can do nothing about this because people are under occupation, and the most valuable thing that the Ukrainian side has are human lives of the Ukrainians. And before the Russians blew up Kakhovska Dam, for a couple of months we read about in their Telegram channels that the Ukrainians are planning to blow something up on the dam, and eventually it happened. So there was this case of preceding, but when they create poorly scenarios, when they kind of describe that there might be so many scenarios, including a threat at the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, and Ukrainians designing dirty bomb and this and that. So they create different versions of the future and then figure out which one they will kind of make happen as a reality. Chemical, bacteriological, nuclear, we'll see whether it happens at all, but they prepare via media everybody. First of all, their own population, because their major narrative is that they are not the occupiers, they're not occupying anything, and for some reason their population believes it. Still.
With the United States Chabot College Spectator News. I'd like to start with the fact that obviously, historically, operational security has always been in the shadows, I should say. But with considering that, we think of what's going on in the United States, and we think about the Foreign Legion, we think about Legion DIU, and we think about the level of fear among troops and also operational security to not show their faces or to not show family members back home what they're doing, especially because of, as you've spoken about, Telegram channels like Track a Nazi Merc, and that they can be documented. And so there is a level of fear among troops here in terms of what they can show, and then also scrutiny within units because people, show what they're doing or where they're at, and that's, bad for operational security, as you guys have already said. That's why there's a lag of information. With the upcoming elections and debates that are coming up, we've also seen a high level of anti-Ukrainian agenda, I want to say, from not only Trump, but Republican candidates that follow Trump, and conflict within the GOP itself on which way to go about this. And so I know that it's very important to not only maintain support of Western allies, but also within the United States. And so with keeping in mind, if you go to any kind of documentation or media that has to do with foreign fighters and how important it is for foreign fighters to receive donations from back home or support from their family members and things of this nature, also with the mission statement in mind of winning hearts and minds, right? Now we're talking psychological operations and we're talking about propaganda. And so with that all in mind, and there being such conflict within politics, especially from the Republican Party, and such strong, I want to say, wackadoodle patriotism from Republican followers that are big on fake news, fake media, and things of this nature, how does the Ukrainian government or the Foreign Ministry of Defense plan to be able to combat this and to keep American or U.S. support in favor of the war and keep that support coming in with such challenges put before foreign fighters and say, you know, Legion DIU not being able to share information across the airwaves, and it also being, especially as a media person, how important it is for people to see, right, to be able to see what is happening and to see what fighters are doing, because that in turn turns into support and then in turn more donations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have a very long question. You have been talking about our foreign affairs, our attempts to create some communication with U.S. society and with U.S. governmental. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. I'm from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. So, as for me, I can't answer on your question, but I can say that now in MODs of Ukraine, we are working on some new ways to communicate with foreign society, not only with Ukrainian or society or Ukrainian army. And to your maybe second question about people who want to know what is going on now to support army and so on, we always have to balance, as you said, operational security, our mobilization, and our society, their will to be mobilized. And we have to communicate with very wide frames. We can't destroy this balance. And I think it's all that I can say to your question. Maybe my colleagues will add something more.
Я додам на рахунок.
Well, I would like to add to what you said about the Republicans and how the Republican Party is treated in the Russian propaganda, because when our president came to U.S. Congress, he met with both Democrats and Republicans, and both parties stated that we keep supporting you in any way. We are not singing along Putler's lyrics, and we don't want you to sacrifice your territory or start some peace talks with Putler, because we see what it ends up with. Minsk 1, Minsk 2, and as a result, it's still full-fledged war. So the information about whether Republicans are ready to continue to support Ukraine, or if a Republican wins the elections, then the America will abandon us. Well, it's of course not true. We all recognize that. Of course, certain things might change, and our needs will keep changing, but nobody will refuse Ukrainian requests. Nobody will give up on Ukraine. And remember this fake about Zelensky earning more money than Barbie movie. And as it turns out, the Russians claimed, those who created this fake, that it's the Republican Party that put that ad in New York City. So there's a clear narrative in the Russian propaganda channels to support this idea that for some reason they believe that the Republicans are the Kremlin friends, and so they hope that when a Republican will become the president, then come tomorrow, the war is over because Putin will capture Kyiv and Ukraine will fall. Well, of course, we recognize that it's not true. These are all manipulations, and you need to react to them, of course, but we don't need to be afraid of them because we have the direct connect with one another. We look face to face and eyes to eyes. By we, I mean the military, the general society, the president, everybody. But yeah, we recognize this narrative is out there.
Is comment much, but I can say we need to be very closely watching the information aimed at Poland right now. We have an election on October 15th, and currently the extreme right wing in Poland is being hit very, very hard with anti-immigration messages against Ukraine. Let's talk about the history a century ago. So be very mindful of this. One comment or feedback, at least, that you have about the Russian propagandists that have come into this country for the last 9 years. One that made news not too long ago was Gonzalo Lira, who was actually right around the corner from us in Kharkiv, by the way. His apartment was raided. But he posted the charges. He actually took the time to post the Ukrainian charges against him. And what I'd like to hear about is how literally in the charges is the violation of martial law. You know, it's spelled out in the law what is considered to be pro-invasion force propaganda versus news. So if you would comment a bit on that, because we do have at least well over a dozen, nearly 20 Americans and Europeans that have been here for many years, really pushing the Kremlin narrative. Дякую.
Ну, це ж таки питання свободи слова.
Well, it's still about freedom of speech. Unfortunately, the Russians use it as our vulnerability, our weakness. And so, if there are grounds to instigate a criminal case or send out those journalists, we make them personas non grata and not allowing to come back, and it's being applied before. But you know, point being that it's quite difficult in a democratic state with some rule of law, even in the time of war, to figure out where is a Russian narrative and where is the personal point of view that a person has the right to share. So to prove corpus delicti, you need to prove that somebody gave the perpetrator the task of sharing a particular lie, and that's what was done. But being the rule of law country, we can still not go against the laws and claim something that we have not proven with evidence at hand. The Center of Countering Disinformation has the list of, as we call them, pseudo-experts, those who disseminate Russian narratives, or as we say, they share narratives that echo with Russian propaganda. Why we say it so? Gonzalo Lira, Pepe Escobar, Paul McGregor, Skortrita, all those names. Of course, we know about all of them. They all go to Solovyov's studio, and they all love Putler, especially Pepe Escobar, who loves Zakharova. For him, Lavrov is his idol and icon that he prays to. And when we published that list, the international colleagues criticized us that this is the martial law lists, they claimed. It's for the firing team, squadron, to shoot down the freedom of speech in Ukraine. But all we said that, well, look, there are Russian narratives, and these are the people from this list who, on the daily basis, step by step, are using exactly the same narratives as if they just cut and paste them. But they haven't proven, we cannot prove the whole sequence of events. We cannot prove, and we have no evidence that this person was paid or instructed by the Russians. Yeah, it could be that this person just has this opinion. Yeah, it's 99.9% echoes the words that Lavrov and Zakharova said. Well, it just happens so. Well, the stars were in Capricorn sign, but the fact that he's been doing that, reading their minds for the last 15 years, well, where's synchronicity in that? But we've been criticized that we are preparing the kill lists, and unfortunately, but we are naming those people, of course. Well, any potential cooperation of the foreign citizens with enemy intelligence, well, it's all about our colleagues from FBI, MI5, and others. Colleagues, I would like to thank our speakers. I would like to thank you for staying with us. This was Media Center Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.